So I want to start off the panel for you to understand who it is that's speaking to us. So my first question to the panelists, and we can go in this order, is what country did you leave? What year did you leave from? And what do you think the main factor was in your decision?
So my name's Hamra. I left from Damascus, Syria, this city where I was born. We left in the year 1994 as my family. What led to my decision was we were finally given the right to immigrate out of Damascus, Syria. Jews in Syria prior to the 1990s were not allowed to leave. We were treated as political pawns until the US reached a treaty with Syria that secured the release of the Jews in 1992.
Hi everyone, my name is Sara. I'm a first-generation American, so the question of where I left to was I'm a born and bred New Yorker, so I moved from Queens to the Upper West Side. But I can speak on behalf of my family's heritage. I am actually an Ashkasgard Cholent rice mixture in terms of my heritage. I am technically half Afghani from Herat. My grandparents are from Herat, Afghanistan, which is on the western border near Mashhad in Iran, and they left in the 50s. My dad, their young baby toddler with them, and they went to Petah Tikva in Israel. They left once they had somewhere to go, and it was as simple as that. They left in the 50s. Once Israel was founded, they crossed the border to Iran, and they flew to Israel from there. The other side of my family, a quarter Baghdadi and a quarter Russia-Polish Canadian. The story of Baghdadi Jews is probably more familiar to some of those in the audience. My own grandfather, I'm very proud to say, was a graduate of the American University of Beirut, both college and medical school. And he almost lost his position in medical school because of his Jewish background, but because some of the professors knew him, he was able to maintain his spot. And which means he was a Baghdadi Jew living in Beirut during the 40s, Israel, the whole thing. And the Ashkenazi Russian-Polish story, I'll leave to the side. But for this evening. But essentially, I think one of the takeaways, at least for my family heritage, is that once they had a Jewish state to go to, they made their plans, they left, and they have not looked back.
So I'm Isaac Choua. So I'm also a first-generation American, so Brooklyn. My family's story is a bit interesting in a sense where my family's been in Lebanon for, at least we could count, over 400 plus years. But it wasn't really that I say we as I was there, but for me it feels very much alive because when you're Lebanese, you live in the nostalgia of Lebanon. It always has an allure. You could probably ask any of the Lebanese women in the crowd, they'll tell you the same thing. But they left in '77. And it was pretty late, but for us, there was always the want and desire to stay there. But the country became inhospitable, not just to Jews, but to Christians as well, and also Muslims as well. But it was because the PLO started the civil war that made it more complicated for Jews to stay there. My family actually, a lot of Lebanese Jews actually went to the mountains. The deal in New Jersey of Lebanon was Aleh, which is more in the mountains, and a lot of the Jews camped out there to hide, to lay low. Hopefully this will pass because Lebanon, if you're familiar with it, usually there's another conflict every couple of years. So there was really no hope in that sense. A lot of them did leave, and mine left in '77. If I do come off with a little accent, it's a mix of Brooklyn and also having a lot of Syrians in my community, so we mixed it up. I grew up with Arabic, Hebrew, English, French, Spanish, everything mixed together in one, so I speak no languages. So I apologize. But for us, Lebanon was like a nostalgic dream. And it still is, even though I'm first generation American, I still very much feel Lebanese. I feel Lebanese. So.
Thank you. So I'm Syrian Lebanese. And whenever I say that, people get confused. And as you know, the Syrian community has, in a way, absorbed the Lebanese community. But if you ask someone from Lebanon if they're Syrian, no, we are Lebanese. But a lot of people don't even know that we exist, especially, breaking out of the Syrian deal bubble. You realize that Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews have done a horrible job when it comes to telling our stories. Not only when it comes to the Jewish world, but to the Middle East. Because when you think of Middle East, you don't think Jews. And when you think Jews, you don't think Sephardim and Mizrahi Jews. And I think that leaving our voice out has really centered the narrative of the Jewish people, the Jewish history, the Jewish story, and in that, the existence of the state of Israel, away from what our stories are. Right? When people say, why does Israel exist? They say because of the Holocaust, and they don't understand the stories behind. Now, I'll get back to Israel later, but right now I want to focus on the work that each of you have done, because you're all pioneers in your own fields, and you've all been very vocal in your own way. So what have you been doing to get the Mizrahi Sephardic narrative out there, and how do you think that we should be reframing the conversation of Jewish identity?
Rama? I'll go back.
I guess we'll start with me. Is this working now? No? So I guess we'll start with me first on that one. The funny thing is, anytime someone always is confused, like, oh, you're a Lebanese Jew? It's like, it's only north of Israel. Poland just seems like a farther stretch from Israel as a base. But, one of the things that we're working on right here is this exhibition. This is something that the World Jewish Congress has been very on the forefront, carrying and about the legacy of Jews in the Middle East, North Africa. I know that the ambassador earlier mentioned the New York Times article about Jews from Muslim lands are in great danger. If you look at the article, it's actually the World Jewish Congress that makes that statement at the UN. So this has very much been part of the legacy of the World Jewish Congress, and we've been pushing it forward and giving a voice to it. Me and my good friend Reuven, who's from the, So the Sephardic Federation, we actually went and had a session with students how to use their identity in Europe, on how to talk about Sephardic identity, Sephardic values. What does it even mean to be Sephardi in general? What does it even mean to be Sephardi in general? Because even though we all come from different countries, what is the country? What does that mean? Why are we so much alike? Why do I feel so much of a companionship with a Persian Jew? There's something deeper there. So we always dig deeper with the students. I don't use the term Mizrahi, so if you're wondering why I'm not, I just use the term Sephardi. I'm a little bit more old school in that sense. But it's really to help students understand what does it mean to be Sephardi, what does it mean to be Jewish, what does it mean to really encapsulate this environment. And then more so when it comes to exhibitions like this and our website, the idea there is to understand who we are as a Jewish people. People think we're here talking about Sephardim or Jews from the Middle East, North Africa, but it's more than that. Right now, everyone here, when you're hearing our story, you're hearing your story. You're hearing the Jewish story. There's no differentiation between Sephardic, Ashkenaz, it's just the Jewish story, and this is just one piece of the puzzle. So we need to get more in touch with that as Jews. As Sephardim, we learn what happened in Europe, and to bring it back to what happens in the Middle East, because it's our story together.
You mentioned working with students in Europe, if I heard correctly.
Yes.
Can you tell us what kind of students you worked with in Europe? Were they Jewish, not Jewish?
No, Jewish students. Jewish students with Wujis. They have it's a union of Jewish students. They have something called Aharon Europe. The World Jewish Congress is very much involved with that group as well. We actually seeded their first event that they did on educating their students on how to be activists. Sephardic activists. Because the thing is, when you are a student, you're a Jewish student in general, you don't really learn that much about Sephardic history. A lot of the history you might hear tonight, maybe you've heard of it, maybe you've heard in passing, maybe you've heard of some of these characters these individuals on the panel, the exhibition, but they don't really understand what it means to be Sephardi. It's just like, oh, it's food, it's music, but there's something deeper there. There's a philosophical outlook of why we see things a certain way. why we're able to really connect on a deeper level. So it's really about understanding that common value and how to use it on campuses and how to really explain to people what is the Jewish story. Because the Jewish story so far has been told from one lens, and it hasn't been broadened up as we are doing today.
And I want to add in conversation. Someone asked me recently, why do you think that we haven't been able to tell our story, right? Someone said, well, why do you think that we're having such a bad time when it comes to PR? Why are we having so much trouble? And I said, because we're not actually telling our full story. We're seeing what stories have worked for other groups, which is the story of oppression. But the Jewish story is a story of resilience. We have the story of oppression, but our story didn't end there. And that's why you see us moving to whatever country it is that we're in. My family, Mexico, Brazil, here in the States. And we get up and we build out. Now, I know that you're a rabbi, so we always say, why do we have Rosh Hashanah and then Yom Kippur, right? Why do we start a new year but then look back on the past year? And it's because the Jewish ethos is about, let's move forward and get that momentum, and only then can we look back. And it's not about reminiscing, and it's not about harping on mistakes, but it's about making sure we move forward. Now, I want to get to you about the amazing work that you've done. Can you tell us a little bit also about your book?
Sure, and thank you. So I was privileged to do research on Afghanistan's Jewish history and the immigration of Afghani Jews to the United States while I was at Brandeis University. And I was mentored by Jonathan Sara, who, as you may know, is the world's foremost historian of American Jewry. So it was my utmost privilege to study under him. And thanks to ASF in partnership with my publisher at the time, I did further research in archives in the United States and in Israel, and my research was published. And I have had the opportunity to speak about it at universities and libraries across the country. And I think what was most surprising to me is that people were interested. Until 9/11, Afghanistan was a word I never heard outside of whenever I had to fill out a form, where were your parents born? And under my dad, I had to write, where were you born? Afghanistan. I could never spell it. He's also an ophthalmologist, and I could never spell that either. But that was my only association with Afghanistan at all. But after 9/11, and with the American presence in Afghanistan and Iraq, of course, the two places in the Middle East and Central Asia where my relatives are from, and nobody knew where they were in the world, there was an explosion of interest. And the first immediate question I would get, of course, is there were Jews in Afghanistan? It was more like an incredulous comment, no one could believe it. And I understood. I do not judge that question. I myself would never have known Jews were in Afghanistan if it wasn't for my own grandparents in front of me. And so I think my viewpoint might be a bit different from the rabbis. You can tell me a little bit. I view Jewish history and culture from Arab and Islamic and Persian lands as more of a tapestry. I think partially because of my own multicultural background, where I'm not one culture, even within Sephardic culture, I'm not one Sephardic culture. There are differences. Jews from different Arab countries, from Persian countries. The differences start with language, Arab dialects, Persian dialects, but that also is more reflective of the Jewish story, that we actually do have strength in our diversity in that tapestry. And you can see that in Israel, that beautiful diversity and tapestry of Jewish life just comes together. Now, of course, there are also those tribal frictions that result from that. That, I think as a people we're still working on how to find strength in our differences, particularly in tense and painful times. But to me, there isn't a Sephardic viewpoint or a Sephardic approach. It's more of a tapestry, like the brightness of the cultures and of the foods of Sephardic life that very much resonates with me as how I view Jewish history from these areas. And I would say my research on Afghanistan and the opportunity to have it published and speak about it, I consider to be one important part of my own tapestry. I have been privileged to work for the Anti-Defamation League, which is fighting anti-Semitism here and around the world, and they do very critical work. It looks very different today than it had been, let's say, 10 years ago or before October 7th. And this informs my perspective as well in my work that I do with clients today who often have very diverse Jewish backgrounds.
And I want to say, speaking about Sephardism as a tapestry, my favorite thing was when people say, well, how religious are you? You know, are you Reform? Are you conservative? I say, I'm Sephardic. And they say, what does that mean? And I said, well, we don't have to have different groups that, you know, you're not conservative or Orthodox or modern Orthodox or white hat. There's a best way, and we're a spectrum. Where do you fall? I'm Sephardic. I still consider myself modern Orthodox, but I'm very much not modern Orthodox. So the tapestry that is Sephardism, I also think falls into religious practice. Now, Avi.
100%. So I'm not really an activist or an advocate. That's not how I started my career. I've never imagined in a million years that I'd be fighting against anti-Semitism. And I think it kind of goes to what Jason was speaking about earlier, what Adela brought up, and what Your Honor stated as well. And the reality is, we're not people who cry victim. And so when my family came from Syria to the United States, my father ingrained in me, listen, you better succeed. You have no excuse. You speak English, right? You came as a kid, you speak the language, the sky's the limit. So I never viewed myself as someone that was oppressed. I never viewed myself as a refugee from Syria. And so I went on, I started a litigation firm. I sold a litigation firm. I own a mid-sized immigration firm. I was running what I imagined to be my life as a successful American entrepreneur lawyer, whatever title I give me.
The American dream.
The American dream, right? And then in 2001, I saw Joey Borgen get brutally attacked in the middle of Times Square. And that reminded me, kind of brought me back to an attack that happened to me in Syria, which infuriated me. I couldn't believe that the same type of anti-Semitism that my family and I uprooted our lives for reemerged in this country. And I was so frustrated, I took to my camera, I had almost no followers, and I had to say something. And I spoke out. I started with, I'm pissed off, and that became a running joke for a very long time. But, you know, I just continued speaking out, and I thought I was fighting anti-Semitism. That's what I need to do, fight anti-Semitism. But I never, prior to October 7th, truly highlighted my identity and who I am. Right? I think I ran away from the idea that I spoke Arabic for a very long time. It was, I don't want to be an outcast. I don't want to be called a new immigrant, or whatever it is. So, Salam alaikum would never come out of my mouth, especially not on Instagram to the public. But after October 7th, I thought it was essential to highlight our identity. And although we're not victims, we were victimized. And we can speak about our victimization, but highlight our resilience that overcame our victimization. And the reason I'm speaking out now, and the reason what I'm trying to do is get more voices in the Mizrahi Sephardic. I also used to call it Sephardic rabbi until Instagram changed my mind.
Exactly.
In the Sephardic world, because the way I view it is like this. When white supremacism in the United States was exploding, the Ashkenazi community in this country did a fabulous job fighting it. The reason they did a great job fighting is because when they appeared on TV and they would speak to the public as to what happened, what the effects, the outcome of white supremacist anti-Semitism was, it was relatable, one-on-one. I didn't need to draw back. Now, that's not to say that Ashkenazi voices are not crucial. They are, even in this fight. However, it is to say sometimes you need to use a screwdriver and sometimes you need to use a hammer. When you have a Jew from Syria, when you have a Jew from Egypt, Lebanon, Iraq, speaking about the experiences and the hate that mirrors the hate that we're seeing on the streets of New York today and around the world, and saying, look, we as Jews experience this hate. Don't let them lie to you. It's not because of one thing or Israel. Of course we support Israel. It's ingrained in our prayers. You want to outlaw my Siddur? This is what led to our ethnic cleansing. This is what led to our trauma. I think if that message took center stage and the Sephardic viewpoint really took lead in this fight, you could make a huge difference in the fight against antisemitism, support for Israel. And honestly, the way I like to approach everything, and the thing I truly encourage everybody, is complete honesty. Be honest in your advocacy. Don't try to, appease. Don't try to skirt away from the truth to make others feel good about yourself. This is a phenomenon of today, which I think hurts us massively. Thank you.
I just want to.
Feel free to hop in. It's a conversation.
Yeah. So I just wanted to add to that. Once I saw the vitriol that was going on after October 7 on social media, I also kind of jumped to the stage in that sense, and I took on Twitter, which is a terrible place. No one should go there. But I felt the need to tell our story, and not only tell our story, is to also inspire other Jews to understand our story. Because we talk about demitude and being a dhimmi and all this stuff, and our history, and what is it? People don't really understand what it means to be Jewish. They think, oh, it's a religion, it's this. There's ethno-religion, but there's no actual nuance and substance of what it brings us back. We use a lot of these buzz terms. So I took this weird approach when it comes to Twitter, and I write a lot. I write threads. And one of the more popular threads that I wrote is about what does it mean to be a dhimmi in the Middle East, in North Africa? Because where does it come from? Where does it start? What are the historical aspects? What did we suffer under different empires? Because every empire was different. Sometimes it was a blue hat, sometimes it was a yellow hat. Every time it was a little bit different. Can we build our synagogue taller than a mosque? Oh, it needs to be lower. Can we even build a synagogue? Can we even settle in Israel? These are like the nuances that we don't really understand and learn, and that we need to understand, because we're going in a world where everything's really based on emotion. And us as the Jewish people, we do emotion, but we also hyper-intellectualize everything. So at least to stay true to ourselves, let's understand that more. So I started going to Twitter and doing things like that, even going into aspects where people would say, oh, Harambam, Maimonides, he lived a good life in the Middle East. And I said, I don't know, if you read his actual works, especially in the original, it was in Judeo-Arabic, so I put it in the Arabic so they could read it. So they could see what he actually says, and how he actually witnessed, and what issues he had, especially to the Jewish community in Yemen at the time. It's called the Epistles of Yemen. I recommend it, it's translated. I also translated excerpts in English from the original Arabic, so you're welcome to see that as well. And I very much agree with you, we need to put ourselves out there. But at the same time, we also need to understand who we are.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I would say that both of those are important components. Understanding who you are and then putting it out there to avoid what I think is the most important thing to avoid in this fight, which is tokenization, right? We hear the word Ashkenormativity. If you haven't heard it, it's one of my favorite words, which is when you think of Jewish, you don't think Sephardic. And a lot of the times, because we have been so few to stand up and actually use our voices, we end up becoming the Sephardic Jew, the tokenized voice. And people don't even understand who we are to even tell our story for us. So we have to definitely start saying it ourselves. Now, I want to turn to the elephant in the room that is always going to be on any panel that we have, unfortunately, which is Israel. Now, when I was at NYU, I took a lot of classes in Middle Eastern studies, and one of them was a graduate honors seminar with Professor Zachary Lockman, who is a known anti-Zionist Jew. And I sat in on that class week after week, hearing horrible lies coming from a child of Holocaust survivors, but who am I to tell him his story? Until we got to the section on Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews. And he painted the picture as the true victims of Zionism being Sephardic Jews who were living their lives in their Middle Eastern countries until Israel came along. And Israel's existence is the reason why Jews were kicked out of their homes. And then they came to Israel, were treated as second-class citizens, and that is why Mizrahi Jews are the true victims of Zionism. And I heard that story, and I thought it was really funny, and I told it to my grandpa, and he laughed in my face. So I'd like for you guys to respond to this intellectual argument of where do Sephardic Jews fit into Zionism, and are we victims of Zionism? Were we created because of Zionism? Would we be today living in the Middle East had it not been for the state of Israel?
I love this question.
Great.
So I love this question because the question assumes something, right? It assumes that if Jews weren't living in equality, there would not be peace in those countries. That is a big assumption to make. The reality is, although we were second-class citizens, although we lived as dhimmis, had to pay a jizya for our mere existence, couldn't put a Magen David on top of a synagogue in some countries, the rabbi was saying, we did not, for the most part, revolt, rise up, hurt, or attack our Arab countries or the governments in which we lived. So the appearance that showed was we were living in peace and tranquility. Whenever somebody brings this up and tells me, oh, it is because of Zionism that you were removed. Well, what does Zionism have to do with Iraqi Jews Iraqis, right? Rashid Ali, the Grand Mufti, conspired with Hitler. Rashid Ali, the Golden Square coup, which resulted in Iraqis attacking their neighbors. What does Zionism or the state of Israel have to do with a regular Jew in Iraq at that time? Nothing. So that claim is completely garbage. I just completely throw it out. Second thing I like to bring up, and this really confuses a lot of people. People do not realize that Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, a few other countries were all set up almost during the same exact time as Israel was established.
2 months apart. Sometimes a little older.
Right.
You know, like when I love it when some countries are literally only a couple of years older and they're getting attacking Israel.
It's crazy.
Oh, it's a new country. My teta is older. It's like, yeah, your teta is older than a lot of countries.
It's amazing to me that my question to them immediately is, well, if you think Israel is so unfair because there isn't this two-state whatever you have in your mind, why isn't there a two-state solution in Baghdad? 20% of the Baghdad population was Jewish. Why wasn't there a two-state solution in Syria? There were Jews in Syria. Why wasn't there a two-state solution in Lebanon? Why does the majority population of the region deserve further land in a land that was carved out for the minority population? The way I flip that question, I think it's something that we should, I like to talk about it, is imagine the United States, God forbid, falls. And a world governing body comes together and says, you know what? African Americans in this country suffered under oppressive regimes. We're going to carve out a small space for them. This is their country. This is their land. All these other 49 states, white America. The fight shouldn't be how to get more rights for the 49 states population of white America into this one black minority country. The fight should be how do I get equality for Jews in every single one of these Arab countries that constitute the majority population in this region. So until you solve that issue for me, there is no talking about Israel. Israel is our safe haven, not for the Holocaust, because it's our land. It is our ancestors' land. And to me, personally, I stick to I know this is, some people are not going to like me for this, I stick to a one-state solution. Absolutely. Until there are some changes that have not existed yet, so there's no point in me speaking about a two-state solution that I do not believe will hold any merit in the future. So, and when I do that, I actually get through to a lot of Arabs. I get through to a lot of progressives. I have a ton of conversation with Arabs who go and curse very nice Jews and then wish me a happy Rosh Hashanah. That is, again, it's all about honesty. Because honestly speaking, not one of you would feel comfortable in handing keys to any part of Israel, to a Palestinian government, or any kind, PA, PLO, whatever you want to call them, that has still not dealt with the problem, and that problem is the brainwashing of their population, not brainwashing them to hate Jews, but brainwashing them to the point as to desire something different, to desire martyrdom, not success for their children. Until you change that mindset, you will never, ever attain peace. And so I will always stick with Israel, full right for Israel to defend itself with full force.
So I will say, Adela, Israel is not an elephant in the room for me. I welcome it anytime. And I will answer your question to, this was a professor of yours. He was Jewish, you said, child of survivors. I will respond to this as a fellow academic and historian. I invite your professor to speak to anyone who fled the fall of the Shah in 1979. Which is over 30 years after the founding of the State of Israel. That is not why Iranian Jews fled Iran en masse at scale for their lives. Israel was there for 30 years. They fled Islamic extremism. I invite your professor to speak to anyone who survived or is a descendant of the Farhud in Baghdad, which, if my memory serves, was 1941. Israel did not exist. Just because a professor says something doesn't make it true.
Usually false.
That's not to that.
Is it correct that the lives of Jews in Arab countries became more dangerous after 1947, after 1948? That's accurate. But that doesn't mean it wasn't headed in that trajectory anyway. And I consider it lucky that they had somewhere to go. We're not so far out from Hanukkah this year, and I mention it because between the time of the Hasmonean dynasty and 1948, we did not have Jewish sovereignty. And I think for most of us, if not everyone in this room, we were born into a world where the state of Israel is a factual reality. That's not the case for my grandparents, for most of our grandparents. And we take for granted this reality that had not previously existed for 2,000 years. Really try to code that in your mind, that the last time we had an armed forces of Jews were the Maccabees. What a blessing to be able to witness the state of Israel and the IDF in our lifetimes, and something we can't take for granted. I also just want to say, in particular to this professor of yours, it sounds extra painful that he was the child of survivors and saying such things. But the story of what we're going through now as a Jewish people, Jewish history did not start and end with October 7th. We're in a very painful chapter right now, and I share this with you as someone who is currently a psychotherapist and sees clients, including those who've been affected by trauma related to October 7th and anti-Semitism on campus, at work, etc. We are not post-trauma yet. We're still in it as a community. But what does it mean to be Jewish to me? It's that we know that there's more to the story. We know, as people of the book, in Arabic, I don't know how to pronounce it correctly, thank you. A designation given to us by the Muslim-dominant rulers. I own that title. We are the people of the book. And that means, yes, our focus on education and literacy, but it also means in our thinking. We will turn the page. This is not the end of the story. The expulsion of Jews from Muslim lands, the fleeing of Jews from Muslim lands, the genocide of Jews in European countries, and the atrocities committed against Jews on October 7th. It is a terrible chapter, but it is not our story. It's a chapter, and there will be another chapter, and I look forward to celebrating what the future chapters look like.
And just to add to that, we're the ones that get to turn the page and rewrite our own narrative. And I think there's a couple of rhymes that sell the lie. One of them are the golden age of Spain, or the golden age of Jewish coexistence in the Islamic lands. While they are true, that they were good moments, the actual time that terms have ever been used was actually coined by Ashkenazi Jews when they were trying to seek emancipation in Europe. So there is a lie of like, oh, there was always coexistence, we always lived well, but the golden age of Spain was always a lie. And people take this golden age and they're like, oh, they apply, oh, Jews always had a great time. And they think about even more recent, but they don't realize that it was at the end of the Ottoman period where we had this more peaceful coexistence. So a lot of the people that I know over there is during the Tanzimat reform. So during the Ottoman period, the West started pushing the dying Ottoman Empire to treat their minorities fairly, to be able to buy land, to seek higher education. And once we were able to do that, we thrived. And that's why I start from the Tanzimat era, because I wanted to show this is more modern history. I wanted people to even think about the word Tanzimat. I don't know if anyone even here heard that word before. It's very rare that you do. So they take these idealistic periods, like the Golden Age, they take the Tanzimat era, they say, oh wait, Jews have always thrived. And like you guys mentioned, what happened after the fall of the Shah? What happened regarding the Farhud? What happened during the Damascus affair? One of the individuals that I note over there, Albert Entebi, his father was actually one that was persecuted during the Damascus affair. And then where did he flee to? Israel. So we always knew, just like Hamra was mentioned earlier, that we always, Zionism also, just to talk about Zionism, it wasn't a term, it wasn't a movement for us, because it was a reality for us. The people, when they think of Zionism, they think of Herzl, but they don't think of the person that inspired Herzl, was Yehuda al-Kalai. They don't think of the person even before that, Bibas, Yehuda Bibas. Not sure if they're related, but worth to look into. Those are looking at. People don't think of Emil Azaris, who penned the poem at the Statue of Liberty. Also wrote a book on Zionism, Epistles to the Hebrews. I recommend everyone read it. The term "we're not free until everyone is free" is actually, she coins it first. These are Zionists that we don't think about because we don't use the term Zionism. In the history books, it's proto-Zionism. It's before. We're the land before time. But we need to dig deeper, because even when we mention, oh yeah, Jews, they never really aspired to go back, it's in our tefillot, it's in our prayers more than 3 times a day, to return, to rebuild. We have the manual in the Amidah prayer of what do we do first? First we go back, then we reestablish the courts. Everything is there. The manual is there. And we're talking about when Jews coming back, the word even Messiah, it sounds weird, it sounds angelic in a sense. It's very Christian when we think about it. But realistically, when we really think about the word Messiah, Harambam mentions that we talk about it in the same realm as David HaMelech, who's a political leader, right? You think about Bar Kokhba, who was a failed Messiah, but he was also a political leader. The Messianics, in a sense, were political leaders. So we have to understand and really reshape our mind and how we think about Judaism, because when we talk about Judaism, we're almost colonized in a sense. We're thinking about it using other people's terminology. When you think about Judaism, you think of the word religion, but that word doesn't even exist in Hebrew. In Israeli Hebrew it does, but in more classical Hebrew, that term does not exist. The word Am exists because we're a nation. We've always contributed and created a nation. So when people think, oh, Jews are just like Muslims, Jews are just like Christians, actually, we're a culture, we're a people, we have to understand what that means. We have to internalize what that means. We have to also understand there's always been every generation, there's been a yearning to return. I know we mentioned earlier about, once Israel fell and the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, there was something called the Kitos Wars. That actually the Jews in Egypt started rebelling. We're like, no, we need to come back. And they fought. We felt it in Israel, oh, it's just those Jews in Israel. We felt it all over. And then 300 years later, you had another battle where we actually teamed up with the Persians. And we actually tried to come back and we actually reconquered Jerusalem. It was a very short period. But we weakened the Byzantines and we were able to reestablish ourselves for a small period. And these are the stories that we need to understand about ourselves. Because I know I'm very history focused and Torah and everything's really, for the Sephardi mind, And I know you mentioned the tapestry, and that's a conversation I'd love to have. And I know that's not the conversation for this, about Mizrahi and all this stuff. But for the Sephardi mind, there is no difference between secular and religious. I'm going to use that term very loosely. It's all one thing. So our ideals, the Messianic, is a political movement to come back and reestablish ourselves. So there's always been a yearning, and people need to understand there is a yearning, and even though it's very easy to compare us to Muslims and Christians, we're a very different entity together. And once we establish ourselves and stop translating into their language, like the word ger, right? People think it means convert. It doesn't mean convert. It means someone who's getting their citizenship to our nation, right? We have a lot of these terms that we've, translated into the Christianized or the Islamicized version. And sometimes we just need to stay true to ourselves, right? We're an we're a nation. It's not just a regular nation, because that's the word goy. Goy is a regular nation. We're an we're elevated, we have a mission, we have a purpose. And once we understand this generations of yearning to return, then, I apologize. But once we understand we have this generations of return, when a professor comes to us and says, Zionism, it's nonsense, this and that, it's like, sir, we've been praying and hoping and aspiring to this every day. When we teach our kids, Torah Sivalanu Moshe, which is the first verse that we're supposed to teach our children, and we teach our kids Shema Yisrael, Adonai Echad, when we teach these kids these words, it's our heritage, it's our legacy. The Torah is our legacy, it's our constitution, it's our binding light, it's our map back to Zion.
Well, I know that we have a dessert reception for you all, so I'm going to let you go. But I do want to say, for the last thing, is I used to be a podcaster. And on my podcast, my first question I would ask my guests is, where are you from? Why? Because it was a question that always caused me a lot of internal conflict. Because I would say, well, I'm from Mexico. And they would say, where are you really from? And I would say, well, my family's from Syria, Lebanon, Kilis, which is Turkey. And they would say, where are you really from? And I would say, you caught me. I guess I'm just a Jew. End of the day, the Jewish story is a story of migration. Wherever it is that our ancestors came from, at some point, we all came from the same nation. Judaism is something that runs inside of all of us, and we should never let them use our colonized identities against us. So what I want to say for everyone in the crowd who is Sephardic, own your Sephardic identity. Tell your own story, and make sure that you understand that the Jewish community is not just monolithic, but the Sephardic story is inherently a part of it. Thank you, everyone.